Sira had once been a name spoken with reverence in the crystalline spires of Earthlings. She was born of the Velari, a proud and elegant species whose culture revered strength, beauty, and precision of movement. Their crystalline-hued skin refracted light like glass. Their steps were graceful as flowing water, and their voices were considered akin to music itself. Among them, Sira had been something rare, a child of noble lineage, bearing the subtle, shimmering marks across her, arms that signified destiny. The elders whispered she might one day sit among the High Council. But destiny is fragile, and one moment of chaos can unravel what entire lifetimes weave. Sira's downfall came on an unremarkable day when her transport shuttle malfunctioned mid-flight. The shuttle, a sleek vessel designed for atmospheric gliding, faltered during a descent. Pilots corrected the error for themselves, but Sira, seated near the rear, took the brunt of the failure. A violent crash tore through the vessel, snapping safety harnesses, shattering supports, and hurling passengers. Most escaped with bruises or minor fractures. Sira did not. When she awoke in a sterile chamber of polished glass, she could no longer feel her legs. Her body, once admired for its elegance, had betrayed her. Doctors confirmed the diagnosis: spinal nerve severance beyond their regenerative capabilities. For a human, there might have been therapies, implants, or cybernetic grafts. But for the Velari, who prized natural form above all, such alterations were seen as defilement. Her people's compassion extended only to those who reflected their ideals of grace. To them, Sira's paralysis was not merely a tragedy, it was a shame. At first, her family visited often, their faces drawn with feigned concern. They whispered about treatments, about distant medical outposts. But slowly, visits thinned. Their words shifted from encouragement to avoidance, then to silence. One day, she awoke to discover they had transferred guardianship of her care to the medical drones of Earthlings' central infirmary. She was left there, tucked away in a ward designed more for seclusion than healing. The whispers of her peers cut deeper than the accident ever could. She will never rise again. She was marked for greatness. Now she is only a burden. Better if she had not survived. Once her chamber had been filled with friends eager to bask in her presence. Now it echoed with emptiness, save for the hum of machines. When the healers came, they spoke to her as though she were already gone. When they adjusted her chair, they did so mechanically, avoiding her eyes. In Velari culture, broken things were not repaired. They were set aside. And so Sira's world shrank to the sterile, white-lit walls of her chamber. Days blurred into one another. She stared at the window that overlooked the city of Earthlings, with its towers of glass and bridges of light, where others walked freely beneath the glow of twin moons. Her body sat anchored to the chair, and her spirit withered. She tried to hold on to pieces of herself. She hummed fragments of the songs she had once sung in council halls, but her voice cracked with sorrow. She dreamed of nebulae her people had promised to explore, but the dreams turned bitter. Even her own reflection in the polished glass seemed foreign, a shadow of the girl she had been. No one came to remind her she was still alive. No one touched her hand to remind her she was still worth loving. Until one day, the door to her chamber hissed open, and a stranger entered. He was not Velari. His skin was soft, opaque, and warm-toned, his hair a dark, untamed crown, his stance lacking the deliberate grace her people considered civilized. He wore the practical garb of an engineer, his hands marked by grease and labor. A human. At first, she thought he had wandered in by mistake. What business did a human technician have in her forgotten wing? She narrowed her luminous eyes at him, expecting the usual pity, the same half-frown that marked every visitor before him, but his gaze didn't linger on her withered frame. Instead, it fell on the crude mobility chair at her side, its outdated circuitry flickering faintly. His brow furrowed with something she hadn't seen in months. Not pity, Not indifference, but disgust at the machine itself. "That's junk," he muttered, kneeling to inspect it. His voice was rough, unpolished, utterly unlike the melodic tones of her people. "Who gave you this garbage?" For the first time in months, Syra didn't know how to respond. She found her voice, brittle, defensive. "Leave," she whispered, clutching the thin blanket over her lap. "I don't need another pair of eyes to look at me and see what I've lost." But the human didn't leave. He crouched lower, examining the chair with a seriousness that made her heart stumble. Then he said something that silenced her completely. Elias Ward was not supposed to be in that wing of the infirmary. His assignment on Earthlings had been clear: recalibrate the auxiliary systems in the medical district, perform diagnostics on life support nodes, and leave. He was a contract technician, one of many humans scattered across the galaxy as their species cautiously extended its reach beyond Sol. Most engineers kept their heads down, working quietly so as not to offend their alien hosts. Humans were tolerated, not yet trusted, but Elias was not the type to keep his head down. When the sensor grid in one of the infirmary's wings flagged an error, Elias followed it without thinking. He traced the fault down corridors that grew quieter, dimmer, until he reached the door of a chamber that looked almost abandoned. The hum of machines leaked through the seam, and when the door slid open, he stepped inside. What he found wasn't broken equipment. It was her. The alien girl sat upright in a chair, motionless from the waist down, her crystalline skin refracting the sterile lights. She looked like a fallen star, dulled by dust, but her eyes, luminous and sharp, narrowed. At him the moment he entered. "Leave!" she hissed, her voice brittle but commanding. "I don't need another set of eyes staring at me." Most would have obeyed. Her tone carried the weight of nobility, even if her current state suggested she had been cast aside. But Elias didn't leave. He glanced not at her, but at the chair she sat in. The thing was archaic, barely functional, a disgrace for a species as advanced as the Velari. Its circuits flickered with intermittent power, and the crude controls seemed fit for a museum, not for actual use. "That's outdated. Junk," he said bluntly, crouching beside it. "Who signed off on this? No wonder it barely moves." Syra blinked at him, taken aback. She had braced herself for pity, for soft voices telling her how brave she was, or worse, thinly veiled indifference. But this human didn't look at her with sorrow or disgust. His attention was entirely on the machine, as if her paralysis were not her defining feature but a problem of engineering. "You don't understand," she said bitterly, clutching the blanket around her lap. "It doesn't matter if the chair works. I am broken. I will never walk again." Elias looked up at her, and for the first time their eyes met. His were an earthy brown, steady and unflinching, unlike the refracted glow of the Velari. And in them she saw something startling, not pity, not fear, but defiance. "You're not broken," he said firmly. "The chair is." The word struck her like a blow. No one, not family, not doctors, not so-called friends, had said anything like that since the accident. To them, she was the broken one. To this human, the fault lay elsewhere. "You speak as though it can be fixed," she muttered, her voice trembling between scorn and hope. "Of course it can," Elias replied, standing now, his hands still smudged with the grease of earlier work. "It's just a machine. Machines can always be fixed or rebuilt." Syra turned her face away, unwilling to let him see the tears threatening at the edges of her luminous eyes. She had spent months locking herself behind walls of bitterness, convincing herself she no longer cared whether anyone stayed or left. But this stranger had breached those walls in mere moments, not with grand promises, but with something dangerously simple: belief. When Elias finally left her chamber that day, she expected never to see him again. He was, after all, a human technician, here for a contract, nothing more. Why would he return? And yet the next morning the door hissed open, and there he was again. This time, he brought a toolkit. "I had some spare parts lying around," he said casually, setting the case on a table. "Thought I'd see if I could make your chair run smoother. The power core is inefficient, the frame doesn't match your body structure, and whoever programmed the motion sensors clearly didn't care if you could actually use them." "You came back?" Syra asked softly, unable to mask her surprise. Elias looked at her as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Yeah. You deserve better than this junk. If no one else is going to help, I will." Syra's voice caught in her throat. She wanted to tell him to stop, that it was useless, that her life wasn't worth repairing. But another part of her, a part she thought had died with her accident, kept silent. As he knelt beside the chair and began working, Syra watched him. His hands moved with practiced precision, but without the cold detachment of the medical drones. There was something oddly comforting in the way he muttered to himself, something human in the way he cursed when a component didn't fit. For the first time in months, her chamber did not feel like a tomb. Syra didn't know what this human wanted or why he cared. But as she sat there watching him labor for her sake, she felt something flicker deep within her chest. Elias did not stop at a single visit. What Syra thought would be a fleeting intrusion became a daily occurrence. Each morning, when the sterile light of Earthlings' infirmary filtered into her chamber, she half expected the door to hiss, open, and more often than not, it did. At first, Syra resented it. She had grown accustomed to her solitude, had built walls of bitterness so high that even her own reflection could not scale them. Elias, with his stubborn cheer and clattering toolkits, threatened those walls. "You don't belong here," she told him more than once. "I don't need your charity," but Elias never flinched. "It's not charity," he said one morning, pulling open a panel on her chair with a screwdriver. "It's engineering. I hate bad engineering." Syra would have laughed if she remembered how. Instead, she watched him work, his rough human, hands coaxing life out of the machine that had been her prison for months. He replaced brittle circuits with fresh ones, rewired the power core with human components, crude by Veilari standards, yet reliable. Where her people had discarded her as defective, Elias treated her as someone worth improving technology for. And then came the stories. Humans, she realized, could not work in silence. Elias filled the chamber with his voice as he tinkered. Tales of Earth, of seas so vast you could sail for months without seeing land, of mountains so tall they pierced the clouds, of deserts that stretched like endless golden oceans. He spoke of storms that shattered cities, yet humans rebuilt, of plagues that struck down millions, yet humanity endured. "You people?" Syra murmured once, unable to mask her fascination. "You seem to fight against everything. Even your own world," Elias grinned, not looking up from the mess of wires he was fusing. "Yeah, that's about right. Earth tries to kill us every other day. We just refuse to let it." Something about his tone, equal parts defiance and humor, made her crystalline chest tremble. Her own people, the Veilari, would have considered such hardship beneath them. They sought perfection in all things, and when perfection failed, they discarded the imperfect. Yet here was a species that lived in imperfection every day and called it home. Slowly, Syra began to speak too. She told him of her childhood, of the shimmering halls where she once sang before gatherings, her voice resonating like chimes through glass. She spoke of nebulae painted red and violet across the night sky, where she had once dreamed of traveling. Her voice always faltered when she spoke of the accident, but Elias never pushed her to continue. He listened, truly listened, and that alone was a gift she had not known she still needed. The days blurred into weeks. Each time Elias arrived, the chair changed. At first, it simply moved smoother, responding faster to her touch. Then it gained a sleeker frame, designed to fit her body perfectly rather than restrain it. Sensors were upgraded to respond to subtle movements of her arms, making control natural instead of laborious. Finally, one morning, Elias rolled in something entirely new. It was a chair in name only. Its frame gleamed with alloy that shimmered, faintly under the lights. A compact microfusion core powered it, and its motion system was so responsive that even Syra's faintest twitch could command it. "What is this?" she whispered, her crystalline eyes wide. "It's yours," Elias said simply, stepping back so she could take it in. "Not just a chair. It's freedom. At least, I hope it feels like it." Syra's hands trembled as she touched the controls. The chair responded instantly, gliding forward as smoothly as thought itself. She gasped, turning it, spinning it, moving faster than she had dared imagine since the accident. For the first time in months, she felt the exhilaration of motion, the simple, beautiful joy of being able to move where she wished. Her voice broke as tears slid down her cheeks. "Elias, He didn't interrupt, didn't try to soften the moment. He just smiled, his brown eyes warm. "You don't owe me words. Just live. That's all I wanted." But Syra could not remain silent. Her people had abandoned her, even her own kin. Yet here was a stranger, a human no one truly respected in the galaxy, who had given her back a piece of her life. When he held out his hand, not to steady her but simply to be with her in the moment, Syra hesitated only for a heartbeat. Then she placed her crystalline fingers into his. At first it was just whispers. A human engineer had been seen escorting the disgraced Velari girl through the outer markets. She had been spotted laughing in the company of one of the backwater apes that the elder races still considered half-civilized. To most Velari, it was scandalous. To some, it was unthinkable. Syra had been content to ignore it. For months she had been invisible, discarded like a broken ornament. If the galaxy now chose to murmur about her return to the streets of Eltharan, let it. She would not hide again, but she underestimated the depth of her people's pride and their fury at seeing one of their own defiled by human hands. The summons came unexpectedly. One morning, as Syra tested the new chair Elias had built, zipping gleefully down a corridor while he jogged to keep up, the doors hissed open and two Velari officials stood waiting. Their crystalline skin gleamed in the light, polished and perfect, their expressions sharp as knives. "You will attend the council chamber," one said coldly, ignoring Elias entirely. "Now." Elias frowned, stepping forward. "She doesn't have to." But Syra raised a hand, silencing him. For the first time since her accident, she felt the strength to face them. "I will go," she said, her voice clear. The chamber was vast, carved from translucent stone that caught the city's light and scattered it in dazzling beams. Once Syra had stood here as a child, her voice echoing through the hall as she sang to the gathered elders. Now she entered in a chair that hummed softly, Elias walking steadily at her side. Every gaze turned toward them, some shocked, others outraged. At the center, her cousin Tavrin, draped in the finery of high lineage, stepped forward. His voice carried like a blade through crystal. "You disgrace us, Syra," he declared. "You should have faded quietly as tradition demands. Instead, you parade yourself like a grotesque, clinging to crude machinery and clumsy outsiders." His eyes slid to Elias, filled with contempt. "This human has only made your shame worse." Syra's breath caught, the weight of the chamber, pressed on her, the old fear rising, but then she felt a steady hand on her shoulder. Elias stepped forward, his brown eyes burning with fire. "Funny," he said, his voice cutting through the hall. From where I'm standing, she looks stronger than anyone in this room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. To speak so to the Velari elite was madness. Tavren's face twisted with fury. You dare address the council, human? Dare? Elias shot back, his voice low but steady. I've seen your people call yourselves advanced, enlightened, and yet you abandoned one of your own because she didn't fit your idea of perfect. Where I come from, we call that cowardice. The chamber erupted in murmurs, crystalline voices clashing in outrage and disbelief. Syra sat frozen, her heart hammering. No one had ever defended her like this. Tavren raised a trembling hand, his pride wounded more deeply than any physical blow. You presume to judge us? You, a primitive from a death world no one wanted to colonize? You should? Thank us for tolerating your presence. But Elias didn't flinch. He took a step closer, his voice ringing with quiet certainty. I don't care what you think of me. I care about her, and if none of you can see her worth, then maybe you're the ones who should fade with dignity. The words struck like shattering glass. Even Syra, who had braced herself for anger, felt her chest swell with something she hadn't dared feel before. Pride. Not the pride of lineage or tradition, but pride in herself and in the human who stood beside her without fear. For a long, terrible moment, silence reigned. Then the council leader, an elder whose body shimmered with the deep blue of age, finally spoke. Enough. This debate serves nothing. The girl may live as she chooses. Let the galaxy judge her by her actions, not by her cousin's bitterness. It was not approval, but it was freedom. As they left the chamber, Syra's hands trembled on the controls of her chair. She glanced at Elias, who walked calm as ever, though his jaw was tight with anger. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. He turned to her, his expression softening. Yes, I did, because you deserve someone who will stand up for you. And if I have to be the first, then so be it. Her crystalline eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She had expected the confrontation to break her. Instead, it had remade her, for the first time she was not the abandoned girl, she was Syra, and she was not alone. The storm had passed. For months, the protests and debates that swirled around Syra's name had consumed Earthlings. The whispers of disgrace, the arguments over whether she should be allowed to represent the Velari at all, even the council, sessions where Elias had stood his ground, all of it eventually faded. The galaxy was vast, and its attention moved quickly to fresher scandals. But for Syra, the aftermath was not silence. It was freedom. Every evening, Elias walked beside her, through the towering bridges of the city, her chair humming softly as it matched his pace. The Velari watched them pass, some with disdain, some with curiosity. But Syra no longer lowered her gaze. She had spent too long believing herself invisible, discarded. Now she carried herself as though the light refracting from her crystalline skin belonged to her again. Elias noticed it first. One night, as the twin moons rose above the glass towers, he said quietly, You hold yourself different now, taller, like you're yourself again. Syra glanced at him, her lips curling faintly into a smile. Perhaps I am. Or perhaps I found someone who reminds me who I was meant to be. He didn't reply right away. He didn't need to. The warmth in his expression said more than words could. The days grew into a rhythm, each one adding small fragments back into Syra's life. She began to sing again, softly at first, her voice trembling like fragile glass. Elias would sit quietly, pretending to be working, on his tools, though his eyes always lifted when she sang. Over time, her confidence returned, her voice regaining the strength and clarity it once held. You know, Elias teased one evening after she finished, If you came to Earth with that voice, you'd probably end up famous. Humans don't care much about noble bloodlines, but we sure love someone who can sing. Sierra laughed, an unguarded, genuine laugh. It startled her at first, the sound foreign after so long. Elias laughed too, not because the joke was particularly sharp, but because hearing her laugh was reward enough. They spoke of the future, sometimes in whispers, sometimes boldly. Sierra dreamed again of traveling among nebulae, of seeing the red clouds of Gathros and the sapphire storms of Tillis. Elias promised her that one day, when his contract ended, they would leave together, not as a human technician and a discarded, noble, but simply as two people who wanted more from the stars. But even in the peace they had found, shadows lingered. One night, Sierra stared out the window of her chamber long after Elias had fallen asleep in the chair beside her. The moons cast silver light across his face, softening the rough lines, making him look almost fragile. And yet, she knew he was anything but. "They all turned away from me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Even my own kind. I was nothing to them." Elias stirred, blinking awake. He reached out, finding her hand with his. His touch was warm, steady. "Then they were blind," he said simply. "Because I see you, Sierra, all of you, and I'm not going anywhere." Her crystalline eyes shimmered, and this time she did not try to stop the tears. She leaned against him, fragile yet unbroken, and for the first time she believed she was whole again, not because her body had been restored, but because her heart had been seen. The galaxy never truly understood what had happened in that quiet chamber where a human engineer had refused to walk away. To the powerful, Sierra remained a curiosity. To the indifferent, she was just another forgotten figure swept aside by time. But Sierra no longer needed the galaxy's approval. She had found something stronger than pity, deeper than duty. She had found love. And in the vast, cold silence of the stars, that love burned brighter than any council decree or noble title. For all their technology, the galaxy had missed a truth humanity seemed to carry in its marrow. That worth was not measured by perfection, but by connection. Sierra and Elias walked, one on legs, one on humming wheels, into a future the galaxy could neither predict nor control. And as the moons of Earthlings cast their silver light upon them, Sierra knew this. With certainty, the galaxy had turned away from her, but a human had offered love. And that was enough.